Okay, give me a second just to get the stream set up with everything. So hopefully it says I'm offline, but I'm pretty sure I'm online. Please update Twitch. And then we're gonna link it in Tor's room, and then we'll begin just in a second. So for those of you guys watching on YouTube, this will be the BLT Week 1 recap and Week 2 kind of predictions. I'll be doing this this one weekly. And it's going to be mostly everything that, you know, all the BLT stuff, going through all the highlight matches, some matches that you should continue to go watch. Let me just link this in Tor's room. Yeah, I should change this BLT Week 1 recap, Week 2 predictions. Nice. And same thing here. Let's go ahead and edit this. BLT Week 1 recap, Week 2 predictions. And it's BLT 6, 7. Okay, and then, yeah, let's just go ahead and mark it here. Streaming BLT analysis, come join if you're interested. Okay. With that, let's begin. Let's start by going back to Week 1, and we'll be doing, you know, normal stuff, recap for all of the tiers. We have, first off, the Swamperts versus the Hadrons. This matchup was, I expected personally that the Swamperts were going to win. A lot of people had the Hadrons as either the best team or one of the best teams in the league. And I personally didn't really see them as being that good of a team. I wouldn't say that this series confirmed my suspicions as much as this one was kind of like an up and down series. It opened with Frisoeva versus Ewin. Frisoeva made good plays at the end to kind of play himself out of like a bad spot. Ewin brought stall, which I think in Week 1 of a tour, it actually is quite valuable to bring stall, because even if you lose, then it'll scare your opponents into believing that you have stall as part of your like repertoire and you have to prep for it. Generally, the first time you bring stall in tours is like the time that like you have the biggest advantage with it, because people aren't really expecting it and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest part. Oops. Let me just copy that. So in Week 1, it's actually very valuable to bring that kind of stuff. And Ewin played pretty well. I think there's a lot of places where he took risks that were kind of unnecessary. But overall, he played himself into a position where he would have won the game, if not for some fortunate things for Frisso. Granted, I'm pretty sure Frisso was playing for exactly those things, so he had to kind of... He was basically fishing, and, that's what you're supposed to do when you're down a lot and you're in a bad position. So kind of unlucky for the Hadrons. Actually, they got unlucky in quite a few matches. Also, the Confide match, they definitely got a little bit unlucky with some stuff. Updated Kanto versus Abyssal Ruins was a pretty good match. GXC versus the Metallic Mawile wasn't all too competitive, I'll be real. RU game was pretty solid as well. In the LC game, Jack in My Box brought basically what I will consider probably like the most oppressive Pokemon that got introduced in the DLC or in the hidden abilities before the DLC. With the starters all getting their hidden abilities, there's all of the meta, or the meta in this week has been like very different from what people are used to in a lot of the different tiers, with Cinderace really being dominant in OU and Rillaboom in RU and UU being a huge presence, and Grookey being huge in LC, but the biggest mon that got buffed from it was in fact Woobat. I want to highlight Woobat as a mon because I believe Jack in My Box is the only player who brought it this week. I was definitely considering it after I saw it. Woobat's extremely oppressive. It actually has almost no losing matchups. I think every LC player needs to be on the watch for this mon because I think it is basically a ban-worthy mon in my opinion. I don't think they're going to take action because DLC is coming soon, and I don't really see that anything in DLC that can legitimately answer Woobat. The thing is, Woobat doesn't lose 1v1 to like any mon, and it can set up and it can easily deal with all of the Pokemon that outspeed it. So really what you're looking at to beat it is like speed tie mons, or speed tying with like Onix, for example, or like specific answers that often can be played around. For example, like Sturdy Onix, you can just, take your chance, or like you can just set up rocks to prevent the Sturdy from going off, play around Endure or whatever. Like basically, there isn't anything that's guaranteed that can actually 100% answer Woobat, which is like biggest problem in the tier. And I think like traditional Pokemon that answer Pokemon like that, like basically a psychic booster or whatever, stuff like Volibee, which should be a natural answer, doesn't actually answer it because you have the +2 defense from the Grassy Seeds, and then you have to crit it to be able to win. So it gets really ridiculous. All the Pokemon that are faster, like Diglett and Ponyta and stuff, just completely get shat on by Woobat. Like it just freely sets up and doesn't take enough damage. So basically it comes down to you have to Hax it to be able to win in a lot of the situations, or have very specific answers that currently are suboptimal choices. For example, stuff like Whirlwind Volibee, or like random Haze Mons or random Clear Spong Mons, or like Whirlwind on Volibee or something like that. Or sorry, I think I said that twice. Or like Rock Tomb or something on Volibee. Basically some like suboptimal things, or quote-unquote suboptimal things to be able to answer it. Even like common T-Wave users, for example, Ferrothorn, don't actually answer it because Ferroseed, because it just gets Heat Waved and it dies. So there really isn't like a solid way of answering it within the current meta. And Jack in My Box absolutely capitalized on that. Completely destroys I'm Just Gray because he has no matchup, basically. There's no way to beat Woobat if you're not prepared for it, and it showed. TTT versus Z-Strats. This was kind of an up and down game. I think a lot of games this week had this kind of theme. And that was because TTT got lucky at the beginning, or unlucky at the beginning, with Z-Strats creating his Mew, which was in a very good position. But then in return, at the end, TTT does manage to dodge a few Toxics, which end up winning him the game. honestly, I would say that people may look at this game and be like, "Wow, he dodged 2 toxics with his Mew, and he was so lucky." But he was in such a winning position with his Mew that it was actually like very bad. Like the crit on Mew was very very bad, and he could have just won the game straight up without needing to like risk those toxics or whatever. Because basically, one of the things that happened is because he couldn't get his Mew in a or like because his Mew got crit and was no longer in a winning position, he had to set up his Milo to generate any sort of pressure in the game. And then his Milo gets toxic because Milo can't really stop Blastoise from toxicking it. So because Milo gets toxic, then like basically it's it's kind of doomed at that point. So he needs some luck and dodging some toxics with his Mew or like long sleep turns or whatever to be able to win that game. So in a sense, I would say that like maybe you look at this game and you think, wow, it was so hacksy, but I would say like consider going back and looking at it and like actually thinking about like, okay, so yes, he did dodge some toxics, but the hacks leading up to that definitely mattered a lot. And I would say that's true for like multiple games in this week, because like the hacks that happens very, very much like at the end of the game doesn't necessarily mean like that player was luckier throughout the course of the game. So like for example in my match specifically, yes, I did crit the Marini at +6 defense, um, which granted like he gave me 3 chances to crit it, so it had like about a 35% chance of happening. But like prior in the game, he dodged like a head smash from my Onyx, which would have won me the game. So like those kind of things that like when it happens like that, it becomes harder to judge like, oh, did you really get luckier, quote unquote, if you dodged like the last move as opposed to like a game winning move like earlier in the game. So by that logic, I still think that TTT probably was in a fine position. Obviously, it sucks for Z strats, but it's kind of the game we play. And like I would say that if those toxics did hit at the end and he did win that game, then I would be saying maybe TTT got hacked out. But yeah, I would say that coming into the season, I viewed the doubles OU pool as being very, very close between like everyone except for SMB. I should say between shadowmonster, Cheese, I want Otago to sit on me, Mishimoto, TTT, and Z-Strats, those 5 players in the middle of the pool, I viewed as very close. And I think that all of them have like very similar playing abilities. And a lot of it will come down to prep. I think Mishimoto was the best out of those. But like I would say that if you put any of those 5 in like any order, I would have like accepted it as long as like you had those 5 like considered close. So I think TTT getting a win here is like really big because I think every win against one of those, like for one of those 5 players against one of those other 5 players, will be considered very big. And of course, also beating SMB would be considered very big as well. However, I think that's a lot less likely to happen. And then Bandrizzle Lol beat Dugza in a pretty clean game. I think this is why a lot of managers were a lot more hesitant on spending big money on mono, even though there were quite a few like pretty like considered pretty premiered mono players in the pool. People like Deccan and Dugza, Havens, etc. Maroon, but like people were hesitant to spend big money on them because they don't necessarily, even like Dugza, who was a prior ribbon holder, wasn't like able to beat Bandrizzle, who is like really not like a mono main. Which I mean, like he's a good player, but not being a mono main doesn't necessarily mean that much, I guess. Even against what like a ribbon holder. So like if like okay, so I would say if I as like I'm a decent player, right? But if I played like RU versus a prior ribbon holder, I would say I had like no real chance. So I think mono is a little bit different, mostly because I think also a lot of it comes down to this tier, from what I've heard, has been extremely matchup dependent in Gen 8. Even compared to prior gens, Mono obviously being a matchup tier, but even compared to prior gens, Gen 8 has been like even more polarized than before. So that's kind of just like something to note. Okay, moving on to the Bolts, who actually 6-2 the Snoms in a beat down series, if I'm honest, in what is considered by almost everyone to be the worst team in the league. I was saying before the season that it's even worse for them because having everyone else look down on you can make you lose a lot of motivation, especially for players like Snowfall, who they've already accomplished stuff outside of BLT, and getting drafted to the worst team, it can make you lose motivation. But maybe seeing as they've won in a very solid fashion, maybe some of these more veteran players like Trade and Snowfall will take up that mantle of being the veteran player and kind of lead their team to be in a good spot. So APW, who is, I believe, known as Malicious Moonsault or something like that on PS, Tempering. Not really a huge surprise for me. Honestly, I think Tempering has been a very middling player throughout most of like how long he's played. And that's no knock on him or whatever, but or like kind of is a knock on him, but like I would say that he like not a knock on him as a person or whatever is what I meant. Like he is just not like an elite player in this pool, and it kind of did show. He brought like basically cheese and wasn't able to capitalize on the which kind of shows your hand a little bit. I think one thing that I would say is that cheese in general should be brought versus someone that you don't expect to normally win against. I think that if you're bringing cheese versus players who are worse than you, it kind of isn't like a consistent strategy. Oftentimes you will lack the options that a normal team could bring you. And I think SSOU is kind of like hard to cheese in general. The cheese that a lot of people have brought this week was Stall basically, and Stall is basically what kind of similar to what the HO provides in the sense that it completely changes the game to be based on you instead of your opponent. But not winning with that kind of team is, it's not really even like hacks or whatever. So it kind of does show your hand a little bit. And so I don't love that. Halaman versus NRTS. NRTS brought a better team and played worse. If I'm honest, I think Halaman played better, and he made some bad plays as well. But I would say overall he's played like much better than NRTS, and he performed about as I expected. And so I am a little bit confused as to why NRTS did go for that much. I kind of gave the Storms a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. They're like, if the guy got paid like for 14K or whatever, I should expect him to play at least like a 10K player. Didn't seem like that to me at least. But maybe it'll just be nerves and he'll pick it up in the future weeks. So Snowfall, he won versus Ramo lost. No real surprise there. Was a solid game. PCD versus SMGs was kind of like a beatdown if I remember correctly. Not Mian versus GW. GW was expected to win that matchup after the sub. Mikav versus Plaz. Mikav had a great matchup and played it well. I think he didn't even play it that well, but he played it well enough to win the game. But that's fine. You don't need to have and the game was like actually after the week ended, so it wasn't like a huge deal either. Misha beat Lightning, which was expected. Lightning choked away like basically a critical turn at the end that could have won him the game, but he didn't see the line. It does kind of affirm a lot of my suspicions about like it's hard. The Doe is the hardest tier to pick up coming from any other tier because it's so different. But yeah, Misha capitalized on that, won that game solidly. And then Richard Pepper beat Maroon. He brought a really whack team that just looked really weird. And I think that kind of caught Maroon off guard. He made some mistakes, and Richard Pepper won the game. I don't really know if this will be a continued thing for him, but this has been like mono has kind of been a little bit telling this week as to who wins because it doesn't necessarily favor the player that has been traditionally better. So that's just something to watch out for. Twixtry beat Gun Gun J. There was no real surprise there. It was kind of a beatdown. Ham versus Star Reel. That was another stall game where Ham didn't really have that many tools to deal with what Star Reel brought. This is what I was talking about with the stall. There was multiple players who brought the stall week 1 because, you know, frankly, if you're not prepared for stall, it often can punish you really hard. And, you know, Ham wasn't really prepped for stall. There was some ways that he could have played around it, but Star Reel played it solid enough to the point where it didn't give Ham that many opportunities, even though he did try to capitalize on some and get into, like, you know, he tried to fish for some crits, and if he did get one of those crits, he could have opened up the game. But he didn't end up getting anything, like, his way either. So it just, like, he was in such a losing matchup that even though Star Reel didn't play as well and gave a few openings, like those openings weren't exploited that much or enough for him to actually be able to pull that game back. So he lost that one. Tectonic Destroyer versus Deccan went solidly to Tectonic Destroyer. Mac 3 versus Gorax was also very solid. Ziri versus Toasted Buns. Basically, I think this game can basically be summed up by watching turn 1. You see the Gourgeist frisk the Scarf on the Flapple, and then the Gourgeist reveals Scarf Wisp, and basically the game is over from that point. There was no way for Ziri to mount an offense after his Flapple really got burned. I don't play enough NU to know if that's like a common enough set that you should scout it, but if it was, then that would have been a misplay. I don't really know, though. It seems like that wouldn't be that common of a set, but you know, it caught Ziri off guard and it basically won him the game. There wasn't much he could do after that point, though. Jaren versus Parivard. Parivard brought like a trash team, if I'm honest. Like, he just lost to normal Timber. He had no fighting resists. But Jaren, apparently he brought some like weird spread on his Timber or something. But yeah, he basically, Parivard basically brought like a cheese team with like Memento plus Diglett. So there's that. SMB won a pretty solid game. LOL Troll game, I think he brought kind of what I would expect for kind of like an unknown commodity in doubles versus SMB. He just tried to cheese him is essentially what he tried to do, which is I think a fair point because if you're not going to win a fair game versus SMB if you just play standard versus standard. Like if you bring like Goth Melmetal stuff versus SMB bringing Goth Melmetal stuff, like there's no way you're winning that game ever. So you know, he played kind of cheese gimmick strats, and it didn't pay off. And SMB kind of just crushed him with Goth, which is, you know, fair point. And then Maki's Fox lost to Scythe XV. I don't really remember that much about what happened that game. But yeah. And then our series, Bluemax beat Jovan. Jovan really didn't have that good of a T-Spikes matchup, and then I was like kind of an oversight on our part, and he just lost the game off that. Not much he could have done. Like, there were a few things, but like the matchup was quite bad. Then there was Reginald versus prodhein, who Reginald just cleanly played the game. prodhein had basically no matchup for Modest Hydreigon, and he just lost off that. You know, which is actually like a lot of SSOU games are like that. Modest Hydreigon has been such an impressive force because, you know, like you would think Max Bedef Clef would probably be like a good enough answer to to Hydreigon, but like if you run Modest Life Orb, it just OHKOs it. So there isn't really good defensive answers. So you have to be willing to offensively pressure those teams and be able to prevent those Wish Ports from happening onto Hydreigon, because otherwise Hydreigon's going to get some kills. And oftentimes, if the other members of your team can also convert on that offensive pressure, then the game kind of just snowballs out of control, because so many of these SSOU teams do heavily rely on defensive backbones to actually play the game. So Reginald played it very well. Cather versus Oras Mega. Oras Mega had some really good techs, specifically Toxic on his Keldeo to be able to catch the Sylveon from coming in, and because of that, he basically won the game off of that, since the Sylveon did not have Heal Bell. So he was able to convert that pressure and pressure down Cather, and he played very well, and I'm very impressed with how Oras Mega played, considering I did watch this game a few times through. And he played a very solid game, which is impressive. I didn't really see him as being a top player in this UU pool, but after having watched a few games, I think Oras Mega can be considered one of the best players in our UU pool, which is, granted, kind of shallow this year, but I think he is near the top of that list. Feliburn versus the Franklin. Feliburn played a very solid game. He pulled back from a deficit, but he managed to come back, and he's, as expected, Feliburn doing well. Prince of All Tacos also this week decided to bring Stall. Like I said before about Stall, it can be a very good choice week 1, or if you haven't brought it before, because people won't be expecting it, they won't be prepping versus it. But in this game, he didn't really have any answers to like a specific threat, which was Rotom Fan to clear hazard offensive pressure on from the stall, as well as Specs and Abomasnow together. And Prince of All Tacos kind of solidly lost, and Skipcam played very well. He played to play around like what his win cons were, which is basically what you would need to be doing against stall. Sometimes one of the big advantages to bringing stall is that some players just cannot get over that barrier of playing well enough to understand the late game win conditions, and Skipcan definitely was able to break that barrier, as in he was able to play better. Granted, there was some stuff that he got kind of lucky with, some freezes and stuff, but it was like a generally losing matchup anyway. So even if he didn't really get lucky, granted you generally will get luckier versus stall because you have more chances to fish, but even if he didn't really get that lucky, he probably could have finished out the game pretty solidly. And the matchup was pretty heavily in his favor, and as long as he was playing consistently, then he was probably in a good spot. I already explained my game versus Raj. Then Cheese played versus shadowmonster. Cheese got kind of lucky early, very early in the game, and he got lucky to the point where it kind of shut shadowmonster out of the game completely. So shadowmonster really didn't get to play that game at all. He got sat on by Melmetal and whatever. So he didn't really have much he could do because Cheese did get lucky. But that game was even without luck, I didn't really like shadowmonster's team. This was kind of my personal complaint of him when comparing him to Mishimoto and Cheese, because Cheese also has me to prep with him, but shadowmonster, I think his biggest weakness was that I often don't think that his teams are 100% solid, and he often brings big weaknesses, tries to C-team, and sometimes loses sight of what's actually good. And I think that's going to be a big worry for me about him in the DLC meta, since the meta is going to be adjusting so quickly, and that kind of stuff. Then finally, Havens versus Floss. Havens got very lucky. Not much else to say here. He played to his outs, and he got some of those outs. So overall, this week, the biggest surprises were definitely the Bolts and the Alakazams. I think for the Alakazams, I don't see them as being it's not like their season is over. They still have very strong players. I will be curious to see where they end up though, because if they still have a few more bad weeks, then they could miss out on playoffs, and I think that's where their roster really shines. I think they really need to get to playoffs to really demonstrate that they have, you know, the best players, as it were. I think what they have shown is that their dough slot's probably going to be an auto loss versus any of the teams with a good dough player, so any of the 6 teams other than the Bolts. And their mono slot may be kind of weak, but it doesn't really matter, as we've seen in mono. Mono can be a more, you know, like a more wild tier where even worse players, quote unquote, may be able to take wins off better players, where I don't see that in a lot of the other tiers. But it depends. If they can clean up their act, they'll still be a very scary team. The Bolts could also turn around what preseason expectations are on them. But really, the big worry will be about the Snoms. If they have another bad week, then the Snoms could be kind of like spiraling out of control. I know that I don't really see a lot of their players as being, good mental players, and I can only imagine that their chat will continually deteriorate if they don't have like a few good weeks, like one or two, at least one good week in the next 2 weeks. Like if they lose this week and it's very solid against us, then it may be a very bad news for them. So with the recap done, let's go into the predictions part. I'll try to do this a little bit faster because I did spend a long time on the recap part. UK versus Totes. Update Kanto should be very solidly in the lead here. Should be free. Frisoeva versus Dom should be free as well for Frisoeva. Snowfall versus Metallic Mawile, very easily Snowfall here. Trade versus Bloodstained, I don't know how to pronounce that. Trade should win very solidly. You're going to see that, especially in the early weeks, I think a lot of teams will try to get in their sub slots to be able to either develop them or more than likely get them out of the way so they don't have to play them later in the season. Either of those two things will be beneficial to a lot of teams. Teams that are not really sold on their current 8-man roster will likely be looking at the former, where they want to develop some players for their playoff roster. And teams that kind of already know what they want will likely just be playing some players just to, meet the requirement. So we'll see some weaker players in there, or traditionally weaker players who may be getting better because of their playtime. But that also means that there's might be quite a few one-sided matchups. So Trade likely will win RU. Blab player should be much better than Not Mien here. And Mikav better than I'm Just Gray. TTT better than Lightning, and Vandrizzle should be better than Geo97. So if everything goes by what I think it will be 5-3 Swamperts, and they'll pick up their second win of the season. However, the Bolts could also come out with another surprise. If they do want to win this, I think that they'll have to do some sort of cheesing in OU, and maybe something in NU, which I believe is probably the NU and Mono, which are probably the closest matchups. Moving on to the Hadrons, who want to turn around their season start and match some of the expectations, but they're also going to be against Alakazams, who also want to do the same thing. So wait, okay. Thinking I was playing RU and called me a new player, UU. I mean, I wouldn't say that, like, what I'm saying is, like, not really about being, like, a new player or whatever, but it's about, like, not having the experience of, like, a Snowfall or whatever, or a Trade. Like, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I definitely think that BLT is, like, a great place, like, kind of a tangent, but BLT is a great place to start your towards, like, being a competitive player, because it does get you a little bit into the door. You get a nice mix of, like, very good competitive players. Like, there's people in here that are, like, absolutely at the top of like all of competitive mons, right? Like people like Feli, like Ziri, like Ham, are people that you would see even if you were playing like the most elite tours, and maybe they're not at the same positioning. Like, Ham wouldn't be considered like the best player if he was in SPL, but or like, I mean, in World Cup or something like that. But he would definitely still be there. And there are players like that, like Twitch3 and updated Kanto, for example, right? But there's also players who they allow you to get a little bit better. You can see the difference between the skill levels. You can get the experience between of playing in those pressured environments. You can like all of that stuff, and that's very valuable for like kind of a new competitive player. And obviously, there's not the huge learning curve, and there's not the pressure and everything, because people in the tours room community generally tend to be nicer. They understand that it's not only about winning, it's about getting better and whatnot. And there are definitely people who are going to be salty, and you're going to get that exposed to that as well. But I would say it's like a great way to kind of get into competitive mons in general, because you can have the mentors there to help you get better. And a lot of people like myself, like Ham, like Frisso, and even players who have kind of moved on from Tours Room, people like Nat and people like Miltank Milk and whatever, who very much started in Tours Room. They got much better and moved on later on, but there are a lot of those like Tours Room players at like the very top of Smug on Tours. So definitely a great place to start as a competitive player. But anyway, back to the predictions. Twix3 versus Abyssal Ruins. I'm going to favor Twix3, although this one is going to be a highlight match. This is the first highlight match. I'll be talking about I'll make note of all of the matches I believe are definitely worth watching. So Twix3 versus Abyssal Ruins is the first. Ham versus Peachy Clouds is also going to be interesting. I wouldn't say it's a highlight match, but I would still favor Ham pretty solidly, even after his kind of like slip up in week 1, I should say. I wouldn't say it's like because of how he played, but more about his team. I'll be interested to see what Peachy Clouds decides to bring versus Ham, but we'll see. Tectonics Destroyer versus GXC. I'll favor GXC as being the best UU player in the pool. Mac 3 versus Sensei Axie is going to be interesting. I would say it's a highlight match, and because I think that both of these players have showed very strong week 1s, and I know that not that much about the RU meta and stuff, but they seemed very good, and I think outside of Feliburn, these two seem like the two that could definitely make some noise in this pool. Zeri versus Confide will also be an extremely good match to watch. Both of these players have accomplished a lot outside of BLT, outside of Tours Room, so I would say I'll favor Zeri slightly because of his lower tier prowess, but Confide could definitely pick up the pace and win this one for sure. Akashi versus Skiroko. I just don't know how to pronounce that guy's name. But I'll favor Skiroku, or whatever his name is. He has done very well on ladder. Jaren's performance last week wasn't exactly inspiring either. Raf versus Z-Strats should very easily go to Z-Strats. As I said before, all of those 5 players that I mentioned earlier should very easily be favored versus the others within their pool. And then Dugza, I'll still favor versus Maki's Fox, even though he did blunder a little bit last week. He should still be very much favored. If everything goes as I expect, then it will really come down to the RU match to decide whether it'll be an Alakazam's tying or the Alakazam's losing. And I think that the Hadrons definitely feel like a stronger team in the lower tiers, like the LC, the doubles, the mono. So it'll really be on the Alakazams to win their tiers that they're strong in and take a few of these other tiers that they haven't had good showings in yet. My own team versus the Snoms. I won't really go too much into depth I'm personally not playing this week. I talked about it earlier, but we want to be doing development and getting those all of the 12 players playing a game in the first few weeks so that we can be flexible with our roster later on. I think Havens versus Maroon is going to be a relatively interesting game. They're both good mono players. Who knows how good the mono quality will be, but we'll see. I think the other one to watch out for is I want Atago to sit on me or Cheese, the Cheese in one versus Mishimoto, and that one will definitely be a great game. All of the doubles games between top players, the top 6 players, will definitely be very interesting. So Cheese versus Mishimoto, as well as shadowmonster versus SMB, are definitely games I'm going to be looking forward to watching, and I think that anybody who loves doubles should be as well. I think Principal Tuckas versus GW will also be a quite interesting match. And then moving on to the final one, Bluemax versus Deccan. Bluemax had a very good showing last week. I think he'll be the favored one coming into this week. Has been playing very well both for BLT, and World Cup of Pokemon. Prodhein, I think, didn't have a good matchup last week, and Star Rails had a really good matchup. So this week, if they both get, it might be determined at matchup again, but if they both come in with even matchups, then I would say that they really have to show if they can play like from an even position, because I'm still not convinced that both of them can do that, or can't do that rather. Like if Prodhein can't, like if Prodhein can play from an even position, if he's given one, and Star Rail as well. And I have faith in Prodhein as a player to bounce back, and Star Rail has shown some good things in the first game, so maybe he can continue his streak. Oras Mega should be favored versus Toasted Buns. Reasons I talked about earlier, but he had a very solid showing in week 1. I should say that Arsenine is miles ahead of Solar Flare. I don't think this one will be close. I don't really need to get too much into it, but I just think he's a better player by a lot. Skipcan versus Xskelly, I think is going to be much favored to Skipcan. I think in week 1 he showed that he has the ability to play well and play like build good teams, and so I have like a lot of faith that he can also continue to show that in the coming weeks, and I think that he's going to be Xskelly. Raj.Shoot versus Parivard will definitely be an interesting one. I think Raj is a better player in general, but it really depends on what Parivard brings. His teams are very whack, and he can definitely get some huge matchup advantages, but he could also completely blunder the entire match away because of that matchup that he just can't win. If he did get queued into, like, say, normal Timber this week, then he just auto-lost, right? So we'll see how the matchup goes, but I'll say that I would favorite Raj. I'll favor SMB as well versus shadowmonster. However, I'll say it's also a highlight match that you guys should definitely watch out for. I think SMB and shadowmonster are 2 really good players who, are both towards the top of the doubles metagame. So I'll favor SMB though, just slightly. And then finally, Floss versus Scythe XV. Floss is definitely going to be favored in this matchup as one of the best SS mono players. He definitely is going to be in touch with the meta because mono PL is starting and he just got bought for a lot. So he has a lot of onus on him to be the best player. And, I think that he can come back from the week 1 loss. So I'm basically saying that the Rufflets are likely going to win in their matchup. They're favored in most of the slots, but I also thought that coming into week 1 about the Gudras. So if they can pull another good week, then maybe they'll continue that good momentum. Coming into this week, 2 of the teams that I personally thought were at the bottom of the league are at the top of the league rather. With the Gudras and the Bolts. So it'll really be about playing well, converting, and whatnot. I'll just give my top 5 games to watch this week real quick at the end, and I think that's SMB versus shadowmonster, Cheese versus Mishimoto. Cheese versus Mishimoto. Twixtree versus Abyssal Ruins. Ziri versus Confide. And let's throw in, I guess, Prodhein versus Starreal. I guess those 5 are the ones that I'm looking forward to the most. I think that 5th one may be a little bit iffy, but those are the 5 that I'll pick as my top 5 games of the week. And with that said, it's a little bit of a longer video / stream, but hope you guys enjoyed watching. And if you did, leave a like on YouTube and be sure to subscribe, or send me a follow on Twitch, whichever you are watching on. And with that said, I'll be back next Sunday / Monday, whenever the week goes up, to do the same thing for week 2. Likely this will be a solo series because nobody else who really loves BLT like me is up at this hour. So I'll probably be the only one who's commentating this kind of stuff. And we'll do like MJ said, like a mid-season kind of recap, probably around week 4. But yeah, these streams will happen as soon as the week goes up. I'll be talking about for about an hour about how the week went for my own team, all the other teams, some good games to watch, as well as some games to look out for in the next week. So with that said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.